and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection.
Yes, we do.
We do. So this week, Carl Teichrib joins us to talk about the Parliament of the World's Religions 30 years later. It's not that he's going to talk about it in 30 years. He may, but we're talking about what happened 30
I don't
years
think I
ago.
can wait that long.
My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow. Now we have 12 more months of summer. You can see it, right, Don?
I can.
We see we were having issues.
I can see it's summer there. Yeah, absolutely.
It's summer, yeah. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Designer Jesus Collection. No longer need your Jesus be a source of social embarrassment. Check out the Designer Jesus Collection. Our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Carl Teichrib, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast here at the Unknown Webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. How fast do you think I can say this? The satirical content includes any and all commercials and credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular announcements notice. The opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If this program really annoys you and you want to inflict it on somebody else, or even if you like it, to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now, our special guest, Carl Teichrib. Welcome to our studio audience. They were here about an hour ago. We recorded this applause. They've since left because they couldn't wait. So anyways, thank you for showing up.
No problem. I feel so fakely appreciated.
That's what we were shooting for. Yes, that was our entire goal. Thank you for helping us to achieve.
Well, and Krista Matthias weighs in immediately to say, really appreciate Teichrib's book. Highly recommend.
Excellent.
That doesn't mean she's high when she recommends it, although that could be the case.
The Game of Gods. That's like the Game of Life, only the Game of Gods, the game. Those commercials.
Yeah, I could hire you, Ron. You could put a little ditty together for me. Play some guitar.
Is that your? Is that the cover behind you over your left shoulder?
It is. It is.
Yes.
So that's not a fake background like Don's.
No, mine's totally fake. To go with the fake applause.
No, it's
we have fake. We do fake things here. Fake applause, fake backgrounds. My background is real because I can't afford a fake background. I have to settle for the real thing.
Well, and for those who are interested, and Krista is right, it's an excellent book. It is not short. It is a tome, but it is worth every page. And in the description panel, you can buy a copy there. Mm-hmm. So now, for those who are not familiar with who you are, we begin with the Parliament because that is an area that you are interested in, and you and I have gone there. We tend to gravitate, oddly enough, to the same direction, Wiccans and Eastern religions, metaphysics, that kind of stuff. And we hang out with the Fellowship of Isis folks sometimes. It's always fun. Which, by the way, for those who don't know anything about it, Lady Olivia, who founded the Fellowship of Isis, she has passed away. But just to get kind of a picture... a picture of who Lady Olivia was. There we go. And she magically appears. Lady Olivia Roberts from Ireland, who founded the Fellowship of Isis. I met her in 1993 at the Parliament of World's Religions. It was a pretty interesting time, and we interviewed her. And so Carl, tell us a little bit about your background again. Who are you, and why should we care?
I'm just a troublemaker. That's what I am.
Well, I care about troublemakers.
I've been a troublemaker full-time since 1997. engaging as a Christian researcher, standing more or less at those crossroads where global religious movements, political movements, and cultural movements coalesce. And so along the way, I've attended a number of interfaith events besides the Parliament, culturally been to all kinds of different venues and gatherings, including Burning Man, and Lord willing, if everything works out after the Parliament, I'm heading back that direction as well. And then on the geopolitical side, attending United Nations and global governance forums. And what I've been doing basically from 1997 on is analysis, documenting, and then writing and speaking on these subjects, putting my material in front of other authors and researchers, professors who use my literature and my content.
Right, and so you do some missionary work in the process of doing that, like at Burning Man. So it's not
when we have opportunities to have those conversations and poke into basically, and you know this, Don, you've been to the Parliament a bunch of times. We're stepping inside their church, and so there's a level of respect that goes with it. We recognize that they are brothers and sisters in Adam, and we want them to be brothers and sisters in Christ. And so when those opportunities arise for conversations, absolutely, let's take those opportunities and run with it.
Well, and you're right. And the fascinating thing about, for me, and I think for you too, there's a lot of energy at the Parliament, is that they are there for religious discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't like meeting someone on the street where you have to figure out a way to begin talking about this, to raise it in a non-offensive way. They're there to talk about, actually, to evangelize for their religious views.
Absolutely. Every 10 feet, you're going to be running into somebody who wants to talk about their faith or their religion. And now just how do you go about having those discussions in such a way that you can bring it towards the exclusivity of Jesus Christ and the fact that God himself is not the same as nature, which for so many various religions, those are foreign thoughts completely. Right.
Now, you weren't at the one in 1993. We just showed the Lady Olivia. I met her in 1993. It was our first introduction really to this sort of a setting where in 93 they had 8,000 people there from around the world. And we walked in and they had Tibetan Buddhists had a huge display right in the entrance when you went in, and they had their monks there chanting. I call it kind of the bullfrog song. I don't know what else to call it. It's very, you know what I'm talking about, Carl. It's very deep.
Yep, it's a chant.
Chant. Yeah. And so I thought, oh, that's unusual. I don't think that would really fly at like Willow Creek, but
well, they haven't tried it, so
yeah. And then we spent time talking with various participants, and they had like guest host areas by each group for those who wanted to come in and talk with them further. That was pretty interesting. And I was very fascinated by the Wiccan groups, Lady Olivia's Fellowship of Isis and Covenant of the Goddess. There were 5 supporting Wiccan groups at that event. Now, why were they there? I would suggest they were there to gain more credibility in the religious community.
And I understand, Don, that
their religious community or the religious community?
The broader world religious community.
Okay.
And I understand that the 93 Parliament really did help set that tone of a broader cultural religious acceptance. And that's something that the Parliament does very well. It kind of sets a narrative or allows a platform for religious movements that may be more on the obscure side, and all of a sudden it propels them into kind of a limelight. I think it was a 2018 Parliament, yes, where they had ayahuasca platformed and given a main stage position for a time, talking all about how ayahuasca opens up venues for new spiritual experiences, those kinds of things. So all of a sudden, the Parliament is not just simply a gathering where there's discussion that's happening. It's a place of showcasing. And I know the 93 event really did a lot to showcase the Wiccan neo-pagan movement.
Yeah. Now, showcasing, and they also are working toward, and we're going to want to come back to talk about why that is, trying to align with and become religious ambassadors for the UN.
Mm-hmm.
And to that end, they have designed their own handy dandy garb, the religious garb for that. There you go.
You're kidding.
There's our future religious ambassador.
Can you zoom in on that? I just want to get the full effect or the full impact of.
I don't know how to zoom in on that.
Maybe if you hold the control key down and press
That's
the plus.
That's the 2000. That's the 2015. Oh, there you go. Yeah, Don. I was actually not. I think I was right behind you when because I got a picture of you with the angels coming up. I should actually send it to you.
Okay, here.
But yeah, that's a 2015 Parliament in Salt Lake City.
That's not. Oh, there we go. How's that?
That's pretty. Oh boy, you know that. I mean, I hate to say this, but I'm thinking like Halloween right now. What do we make of this?
Well, it's coming. That's all I know.
Yeah.
Let's see, where are we going? Okay. How do I get out of that now? Oh, there we go. And then you have, of course, these are peace angels. And this was in Salt Lake City,
Yep.
if you recall them.
Well, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I sure do.
Pardon?
I mean, that he could put that guy at the top of the temple steeple, and he would fit right in.
Well, no, not Moroni. They're peace angels. You've got him and the whole slew of female peace angels, and they're coming to put their finger down and put peace on the earth. That's what their whole goal.
I see.
Yeah, so you see quite a number of sights and sounds.
Was it raining that day? A couple of people in the back had these transparent umbrellas they were holding up.
Might have been drizzling. This is one of the opening ceremonies. We have a blind chief right here, and several other Indian chiefs marching in with, and we'll see that Monday morning when they start the Parliament this year. We'll be down there in Chicago.
Is there something special about being a blind chief? Or
no? I just thought it was interesting.
Oh, okay.
Nothing other than that. And then you have this is really important to the Parliament because they are into trying to fix the environment and apologizing to Mom for how we have abused her. This is really important.
Well,
to them.
Mom always tells you to clean up your room.
Well, it's worse than that because we've made Mom sick. She's sick and tired of being sick.
Mom always told me she was sick and tired of the way my room looked. So.
Yeah, well, so they have a place where you can go and you can leave love notes to the earth. You can apologize to Mom for the abuse that she has suffered at the hands of her children.
And keep in mind that year was Pope Francis's encyclical to take care of the earth, and so there were stations where you could read through excerpts of his encyclical. And I attended a workshop. I'm not sure, Don, if you were with me on that one or not, where they had where pagans were examining Pope Francis's encyclical. And the workshop started off with the panelists reading excerpts. Then they didn't tell the audience where it came from. Excerpts from their declarations, and then excerpts from Pope Francis's declaration, and then asked the audience if we know which came from who. And nobody could tell. And that one indeed was the point, that we are basically on the same page when it comes to venerating Earth.
Right. So that's where we're at now, 30 years down the road from the 1993. Why is that important? Well, 1993 was an important one because the previous one had been 100 years earlier in 1893. Now, there's a motive behind assembling the 1993 one that I don't think most involved with it today are even aware of, and that's a character named Robert Muller. Who's Robert Muller, and how does that impact all of this? What was the Parliament about from his vantage point?
Robert Muller was a high official within the United Nations. He helped formulate 11 of the United Nations specialized agencies, and he was a firm believer in becoming a good global citizen. And his worldview was interesting. It was a combination of human potential, higher thinking, esoteric philosophy. I had the opportunity of spending a little bit of time with him back in 1997, incidentally, at the first boots on the ground research event I went to, which was the Global Citizen Youth Congress in Vancouver, British Columbia. And he wrote a book entitled "The New Genesis." He'd written a number of books, but New Genesis was kind of his hallmark book. And as a United Nations official who was a firm believer in the importance of spirituality and mysticism, and the interfaith idea that religions could come together and operate as good global actors, he really bridges that divide between international politics and international religious development. In fact, in many respects, the interfaith movement is really nothing more than spiritual politics. It's this idea that we come together and in unison, we will tackle social issues, we will tackle planetary concerns. And it's not just simply that we're going to unify. And in fact, you don't see that. The language has changed. It used to be we're going to unify. Then the language kind of shifted to being harmonizing. Now it's more along the lines of partnership, and we come together for democracy and for human rights.
Right.
But Muller's idea was that the Parliament would kind of take upon itself the concept of a Parliament of religions for the United Nations. And that idea had actually been kicking around for a while. The Temple of Understanding, which started in, still is existing in New York City, had for a time worked to become a kind of Parliament of religions within the United Nations. And then in the late 1990s, United Religions Initiative, under the direction of Bishop William Swing from San Francisco, the Episcopal Church in San Francisco, looked to create his interfaith version of a parliament of religions that would be a parallel to the UN. And so, I mean, even at the 2015 Parliament I attended, the 2018 Parliament, the 2021 virtual Parliament, which incidentally was really well done in terms of a virtual platform and had a lot of participation, there was still this sense of we need some type of religious extension of the United Nations. And so people need to understand that the Parliament itself, while it is spiritual, it is religious, it is also deeply political. I mean, coming up on Monday when the Parliament begins, I'm not quite sure where in the program it lines up, but Nancy Pelosi is going to be one of our speakers. So, hey, there you go.
Well, yeah. Now, the original Parliament in '93, it's my understanding that Muller, who was a UN official, as you point out, he was the assistant undersecretary of the UN, and his view of the UN was the creation of a one world government, essentially.
That's right. It was very much that way.
Okay. And he also came to the realization in the process of trying to develop that is that you had conflict with the various religions. And so to have a one world government, you would have to join it with a one world religion.
Mm-hmm. Very much. He was a strong believer in world federalism, a strong believer in Euro-federalism, the idea of one kind of one world in every respect. He was actually what's called by some of his friends and associates the prophet of the United Nations. And he was a very strong believer in one world, and his influence was profound.
Was that prophet Profit?
Well, if you're really good prophet, Prophet, then it is also substantial profit, Profit, in that pursuit. Yeah, we had an opportunity to talk to Robert Muller a couple of times while he was there. He was having lunch one day as we walked by. We just sort of popped into the restaurant where he was at. He was not happy about it. He didn't really want to engage in the question of is there an absolute truth and how would you know what that is versus what they were doing. They also had created the global ethic, which didn't really do well.
Right.
They ended up modifying, they ended up modifying it because in that global ethic, you had to essentially commit to saying all religions are equally true. That was a problem.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, we don't agree with that. So they had to start modifying it to say, okay, at a core level, we all agree on our religious views, but our traditions vary from place to place. They keep trying to refine it to make it more acceptable to the larger religious community.
And I think a part of this too, sorry to interrupt, regarding Muller's worldview, I pulled a quote from his book, New Genesis, and I share this in my own volume. And this, I think, gets right to the heart of what he was hoping to achieve by this political religious syncretism, because it really is. It's not just a spiritual syncretism, it's a political syncretism.
Right.
This is what he says: humankind is seeking no less than its reunion with the divine to transcend into ever higher forms of life. Hindus call our earth Brahma, or God, for they rightly see no difference between our earth and the divine. The ancient simple truth is slowly dawning upon humanity. Its full flowering will be the real great new story of humanity as we are about to enter our cosmic age and to become what we were always meant to be, the planet of God. I mean, it's just a remake of Genesis 3,
Right.
but it's being done on that political stage. But it's not all kumbaya, is it? I mean, I wasn't there for the 93 one, but I understand a fist fight broke up.
You're kidding. Wait a minute.
It was pretty dramatic.
I don't remember you mentioning that.
Main session, Hindus and Muslims got into a fist fight.
You're kidding.
The place went up for grabs. The Wiccan group started doing circle dances and chanting. They ended up bringing in the Chicago Police Department to settle things down.
Maybe you did mention that. I remember. I think the Chicago Police Department part sounds familiar. So this is like they shall know we are religious people by our love, or whatever. Nobody sang Kumbaya that day. What? That's kind of very awkward when you are trying to get everybody together. I can only imagine how embarrassed some of the people there were. I wonder if the Hindus and the Muslims who were fighting were embarrassed.
Well, and it's more than that. In fact, we're republishing our journal article we did in 1997, reflecting back on what we experienced in 93. And you had a number of things that were problematic for the parliament. The Jewish contingent pulled out because Farrakhan was going to be speaking. You had several groups pulled out because of other groups that were present.
I would have attended just to see Farrakhan being delivered by a flying saucer, a spaceship landing there. I would have just to see that. That would have been.
It was an interesting time. Yeah. So you're right, Carl. That was part of the event.
Yes. I think another part of this discussion in terms of the history of the movement, going back to 1893, and this is where things kind of come full circle. The 1893 Parliament is really considered to be the turning point or the tipping point to take us into a new way of thinking. It was meant already back then to usher in a new century of humanity and common humanity. And of course, it ended up being the bloodiest century in human history. But some of the very same players and the same influences from the 1893 Parliament ended up shaping the idea of the League to Enforce Peace and the League of Nations, the Federal Council of Churches, which eventually helped influence the United Nations back in the 1940s. And so already you can, if you want to trace internationalism, this idea of world government and a global, kind of a global framework, the 1893 Parliament is as much to bear in terms of responsibility for the political side of that as it is for the birth of the interfaith movement itself. It really was kind of that hinge point, that changeover into a new international mind frame. And I've got the two volumes from the 1893 Parliament, and I mean, they themselves discuss the importance of world federalism and the world state. So, right. There is this fascination with internationalism, and so the Parliament more or less becomes a springboard for the dawning of this international utopian ideal, in a serious way. It was
Yeah.
right there before that, but now it actually brought together the players and recognizing that religion actually has a tremendous influence in changing the hearts and minds of its constituencies.
I want to come back to that in a moment because it reminds me of something else regarding empire building that occurs prior to the Parliament coming together. But we have an interesting question. I don't want to let it go by Jay Whiz, which is, I think, a good question. Is interfaith effort wonderful to the end that if we all, in the end, will not change our worldview, at least we can agree basic essentials of goodness and helping behaviors? It's an interesting comment. What say you, Carl, before I weigh in?
I think it depends on what your behaviors are that you're looking to change. At least every interfaith event I've been to, and I've been to probably about a dozen or so, maybe more, the behaviors are built around what we would consider to be that more progressive left ideal. So you want to come together and help each other out in your neighborhood. Well, I mean, that's one thing, when you're not necessarily bringing or bridging associations. But in this case, there's more of an intention behind interfaithism than just simply, hey, me getting together with my Muslim neighbor to have coffee. It's beyond that.
Exactly. There's a demand, and we're really seeing it right now in the whole wokeism,
Yep.
And cancel culture movement. That not only should we tolerate, and tolerate means at its core, I don't agree with you, but I don't kill you as a result of not agreeing with you. I don't abuse.
At least in most cases, unless you're Hindus or Muslims at the
Well,
world
right,
stage.
but see, that's the thing. We're not really being tolerant at that point. Tolerant means we don't agree, and we can acknowledge that, but we can be cordial to one another in spite of it. Just politically, I'm going to throw out a name that some will go, oh no, you're kidding. Alan Dershowitz, I really like Alan Dershowitz a lot.
Yeah,
Alan
he's great.
Dershowitz and I would not agree on very much of anything politically. And yet he would fight for my right to, in his opinion, be wrong, but I still am entitled to my right to my opinion, even if he considers it wrong, and I with him. And we could engage, I think, over dinner and have a great raucous argument over it, but it wouldn't be personal. That's tolerance. We don't really have that in this setting. And one of the driving forces, Joy and I talked with you about this, Carl, spent some time with the Muslim contingent there. And while we're sitting there, it occurred to Joy, she asked the wife of the lead Muslim, I'm not sure what he is. He wasn't an imam, but he was kind of the leader of the mosque. Thought about the Wiccans on the dais, thought about the Mormons who believe in many gods, thought about the whole collection of religions that were there, and looked at her and said, I know what they're here for, the Wiccans specifically, but what are we here for? And we don't agree. And so she said, well, I think all religions have some truth. And Joy said, okay. But, the Mormons believe there are millions of gods. Do you believe that? Well, no. And the Wiccans, they do spells. And so, do you? No, that's wrong. That's just wrong. Okay. So we agree that they should have equal platforms, let's say, equal rights to believe what they want to believe. We acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean their beliefs are true. So what are you doing here? And she said this. She said, when I first moved to this country, I moved to a little town called Naperville, Illinois, which is near us. And she said, and we didn't have any mosque. We'd have no place for the men to pray. And so I would open my home on Fridays. I would move the furniture and lay out the carpets for the men to come and pray. And then after a while, I was going to be going home back to my home country to visit my family. And I was concerned, where would the men pray? And my neighbor, a born-again Christian, came over and knocked on my door and asked if she could open the home for the men to pray while I was gone and close it. And she said, I thought if she could be kind like that to me, maybe we could find peace in this world if we go to the parliament and work toward that goal. So, Carl, if the interfaith question is, can we live peacefully with each other in spite of our religious disagreement? Would that be a good thing, number one? Number two, can we live peacefully with each other in spite of our religious disagreements?
I think we do already live peacefully with each other with religious disagreements.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. Absolutely most of the time. And there are parts of the world where that isn't the case at all, obviously. But in a pluralistic Western democracy, we, for the most part, can live peacefully with each other. We do this already on an individual basis, and we should, especially as Christians. My goodness, I want to be able to sit down and have a conversation with my Hindu neighbors and my wicked neighbors, and that does take place on occasion. We're able to sit down and actually have some good conversations, that, depending where you're at. But so I think already we do see this on an individual level. But the difference being within the interfaith movement is what we're seeing is more of a pressure to enforce or ensure this happens around very specific political motives and around very specific social ideas. So it's, I've never sat down at the Parliament of World Religions and heard from the voice of the official representatives saying, hey, we need to ensure stronger national structures. We need to ensure that we have more liberty based on freedom, on basic libertarian economic models. Nothing like that. It's always built around, and in fact, this parliament's going to be really interesting because it's about democracy and human rights. And already the rhetoric that's being projected is nationalism is evil, free market economies are evil and immoral. If you believe in an exclusive truth claim, you are a supremacist. And by the way, that was all the language from the 2018 Parliament and the 2015 Parliament, and even the virtual Parliament in 2021. So there's already coming into it a progressive left internationalist mindset. So it's not like we're actually coming to these events expecting that this is somehow going to birth more of a utopian ideal that we're all going to be able to get along. It's not about that. It actually isn't really even about that.
Right.
It's about advancing a very open globalist type way of approaching the subject. I find that remarkable. So here's inclusion. The 2018 Parliament, I know I've got the big workbook that went with it. The Promise of Inclusion, the Power of Love. And I wish I had the ability to share my screen and to have the pictures up right away. But one great example of the power of inclusion, the promise of inclusion and the power of love, was we had a Baptist minister, and she had made, using the Buddhist Sand Mandala art technique, she had made an image of the Hindu Kali, deity of death and destruction, with a severed head of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh being held up, and then the severed heads of those who confirmed him around Kali's belt. And then at the end of it all, I've got the video. I videotaped the whole thing.
Remember the year that was?
That was 2018. Then they did a dance invocation calling on Kali to more or less bring destruction on Kavanaugh and on the Republicans and those who supported him. I mean, the power of love, the promise of inclusion.
Well, it's like you can't just equally distribute all that love and inclusion. You have to that would be, you need to, make sure that you account for all of the terrible things that somebody did, like having an opinion different from yours, before you go giving it away. So, to me, the best thing about the 1893 original Parliament of World Religions is that if you went there at the right time, was it held concurrently with the Chicago World's Fair?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So you had a really good chance of hearing Scott Joplin play the Maple Leaf Rag in person. That was the first time ragtime music was played to a broad public audience, or one of the first times. Anyways, that's about the best thing you can say about it. What I'd really like to know, though, is was there such a heavy emphasis on this socialism at that first one, or did that develop later?
No, that was already there. It was there in a significant degree. When you go through their speeches and you see what type of individuals were involved in even setting it up, a lot of it came out of that.
Okay, Carl, there you go.
Oh,
are you ready?
Yep. Okay. Oh, yes. There we go. Such love. Such love.
I'm not seeing it for some reason. What was it?
You're not seeing it?
Oh. What's that? Is so, wasn't there like a Kathy Griffin picture that they also had with her holding Trump's severed head too?
Oh yes, but that wasn't at this event. So there you go. You've got and this is a progressive Baptist minister,
right,
who is angry at Republicans, angry at nationalism, angry at conservatism, as almost everybody else seemed to be. So much so that when Jim Wallace was giving his keynote address, I mean, right, he called the upcoming midterm elections that were supposed to take place, I think, within that week, a battle between angels and demons. And if you were on the Republican side, you had sold yourself out to the devil for power. And if you were going to vote Democrat, well, you were on the side of angels. Really interesting. I mean, it was so raw that when my friends Brian and Audrey and I were interacting with some of the volunteers, we were asking, so what did you think of Jim Wallace's speech? Because there was no love in it. There was no inclusion. And even some of the volunteers were like, a little cringy. It was pretty cringy, you know? So, I mean, it's already there. And the 1893 Parliament, if you take a look at the individuals who were involved, they came out of so many of them came out already out of that social gospel, because that was just starting to happen. This idea of an international righteousness that Christians could now infuse across a new world, and a lot of Unitarian, Universalist thinking, new thought, all of that was blending right at the Parliament. In fact, it really blends within the organization structure.
Of course, the thing is, nobody had ever tried that before, right?
Right.
Well, yeah. But,
there we go.
Another interesting side note, Ron, and you might appreciate this, is almost everyone we spoke with, whatever religious group they were coming from,
they mentioned
Jesus.
They mentioned Jesus, didn't they?
Everyone, yeah.
Everyone.
And we have a sponsor.
Yeah, we do. And they have some questions like, do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways and the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and of course, Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements. Cost of admission, your eternal soul. Required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection. London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City, and coming to a church runway near you. Maybe even at Carl's church or one in his neighborhood. So, of course, you know, they hit the fashion runway every time you speak practically, because you're out there, you know, making sure people know about them, right?
Yeah. So here's my question. You were talking about their federalism, their idea of bringing everyone together under the one sort of rulership, if you will. Doesn't mean you can't have various religious views as long as you sort of acknowledge one central religious view. And my question is this: how is this different than the Roman Empire?
Or how would this new world order with this kind of thing? Yeah.
Interesting question, because in the Roman world, you could basically believe and worship almost any deity you wanted, so long as you still bow your knee to Caesar. And of course, in a pantheistic world, that's not a big deal.
So what you're saying is the Roman Empire was the Alice's restaurant of, you can get anything you want. You can get any religion you want at Alice's Roman Empire restaurant. Yeah.
So long as you still bent your knee to Caesar.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So Paul takes a statement that all good citizens of Rome had to acknowledge verbally to be a good citizen, which is that you had to confess Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar is the supreme Lord. And Paul said he took that, and we find it in Romans, where he says, confess with your mouth, not Kaiser Kyrios, Jesus Kyrios, Jesus is Lord. That would be blasphemy in the Roman Empire.
And that is blasphemy within this empire.
It is.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. I've been to enough interfaith events where even from the podium, when the moderator is working through, let's say, a panel, and you've got religious leaders and Buddhist leaders and Muslim leaders and Hindu leaders, and all of a sudden the question of exclusivity comes up. And I saw this myself at the G8 World Religion Summit in 2010, which was mostly attended by Christian leaders. They remain silent, purposely remain silent on that question of the exclusivity of Jesus Christ, because as soon as you bring that up, it immediately creates division, and the interfaith concept is not about division. It's the opposite. It's about union.
Well, yeah, and in 1993, it was interesting. One of the kind of shows that they put on was a series of dancers all dressed in white. And as they're doing their dances, they were talking about different truths. They would say, and then there's whatever truth this is. And when they came to Christianity, they all went, and then gospel truth. Really, really downplaying, making fun of it, as compared to all the others, which were enlightening and helpful and, and not conflict with each other. But the gospel truth must be ridiculed and made fun of and shunned, even, because you can't believe that. And so we go back to first century Rome. You could believe in any deity or deities you chose. You were looked down upon as an atheist if you only believed in one deity, say like you were a Christian. You were allowed to believe it, but you were made fun of and ridiculed for being such a narrow-minded religious snob as to believe in only one true God. How's that going to play in this new one world government religion setting?
Well, it's not going to jive, is it? Already, well, I mean, I truly believe that there is especially in the last 50 years, as Western concepts of the Judeo-Christian ethic break down and are being replaced by what is essentially a global pagan ethic, that there is increasingly a hostile push on anybody willing to stand up and say that Jesus Christ is the only way. It doesn't fit. It doesn't jive. There's not a place for you at the table. If you're willing to push that aside, then around the interfaith global governance table, they will gladly pull a chair out for you. Doesn't matter if you claim that you are Episcopal or Pentecostal or Mennonite or what. Here's the place at the table for you, so long as that stays out of the discussion.
Yeah.
And I think that's really telling all on its own. Like I said, right in the very beginning of this conversation, after the Parliament is done, I'm heading off west. I've got to speak at the Berean Call conference. And then when the Berean Call event is done, I travel down to Burning Man, and I'll be at the Burn for 8 or 9 days. And the one thing that you see when you're at Burning Man, and this will be my 4th time there, and I've been to a couple other regionals and interact a lot with the culture, is that it has that same perspective. You can accept and you advance almost anything else. You'll have temples set up to Ganesha, and I've seen a number of shrines to Ganesha. That's all okay. That's cool. You can have workshops and discussions on Tibetan Buddhism. You can go to workshops with shamans. It's all there. All the religions are there, but the one that is mocked constantly is Christianity. That is openly ridiculed, with art installations that ridicule the church, workshops where Christianity is downplayed. It's really remarkable. Again, it's that same flavoring. So why is this a surprise?
But isn't it also the case that Islam makes exclusive truth claims?
Of course. Actually, there's a lot of exclusive truth claims if you go across the board within religions. Buddhists and Jews aren't going to agree.
Right.
Muslims and Hindus don't agree. You may find some commonalities, but
they not only say we don't agree, but they really do at the end of the day say we alone are right.
I know.
You can't both. They can't be true, and our religion is true at the same time.
And even the interfaith statement or the interfaith ideal that all religions share a common truth, this idea of the perennial philosophy, that there's a single spirit that kind of weaves its thread through all religious traditions, that itself is an exclusive truth claim when measured up against the Judeo-Christian worldview that says, no, here's our truth claim. But they're going, no, this is our truth claim. Our truth claim is that everything is inclusive and open, and that there is a similar mystical thread that winds through everything. I'm sorry, yours is an exclusive truth claim just as much as anybody else's exclusive truth claim. Yeah. And what's ironic with all this from a biblical point of view is that God is both inclusive and exclusive. Inclusive in that he wants all to come to him. Exclusive in that he is the author of life and the one who defeats death. Therefore, it is his way, because nobody else can do that.
Right. And he invites whosoever will, so it's inclusive, which is what you're saying.
Yep.
Exclusive is there's only one way in.
Right.
Now, Jay Wiz again asked a good question. Carl mentioned that the anger we will see in the people at Parliament of World Religions. Does that anger serve the good? What can we do to when we meet that anger? Now, in a sense, to me, that's a little vague. The anger is coming from whom? Is it coming from the Parliament people? Is it coming from, I don't know, Christians outside of the event with bullhorns declaring that if you don't repent, you're going to hell? I don't know that serves any good purpose. When you were speaking of anger, what were you talking about, and how to respond to that?
The anger that I was talking about is the anger that you see, or the hot. Let's call it maybe not anger, because sometimes it's not really in your face. It's that implied and sometimes open hostility, that strong disagreement to the point of argumentation, and even sometimes anger, that Jesus Christ is the only way. And so there is that hostility coming from both organizers, from a large number of the participants, no question about that. And in terms of Christian hostility towards this, number one, there's not a whole lot of Christians from our perspective who go. I think, right. Don, what do we have? 12, 15 people maybe who might attend?
We have 15 going this year, yeah.
Yeah, and we're not going in with anger or hostility. In fact, we want to have good conversations. We want to be respectful when we enter their space. And the other thing that I do see as being damaging, and it's not for the anger, and this anger is not for the good, is when all of a sudden you do see Christians, let's say, with bullhorns and picket signs, and they're standing out there making, almost solidifying the negative stereotype that already exists, right. Because it's no longer now a place for conversation. It's a place for more of a show than anything else. That too is also one of those things that some of my team who have attended Burning Man with me were always a little bit fearful of, that all of a sudden, not that we're going to see people picketing out in the middle of the Black Rock Desert. My goodness, it's 110-degree heat, so you're going to wither away. But we don't want that narrow or that negative stereotype reinforced, because it is a stereotype. Doesn't mean it's true, but it's a stereotype.
Right, and aren't we called? I think Jay Wiz's question is an excellent question, and mm-hmm. as you know, Carl, Ron has watched me do this too. I think people are interesting to talk to. I just think they're interesting to talk to, regardless of what their religious views are. I want them to know what the gospel is. It's my job. I just read an interesting book, and in a chapter it talked about our job as giving the gospel is to accurately deliver it, like the postman accurately delivers the mail, a postperson, to my mailbox. That doesn't mean that they have to be mean to me or not mean to me. It just means that whatever they do has to accurately be delivered. We have to accurately deliver the gospel. It's not our job to make them believe. It's our job to well represent the Lord, which brings me to the point of what I started, which is this. Aren't we called to be ambassadors? And if we're called to be ambassadors, how should we carry ourselves?
Good question. First of all, what is an ambassador? I mean, if you haven't spent any time rubbing shoulders with the diplomatic community, how do you know what an ambassador does? I've been fortunate. I've had that opportunity on a number of occasions. In fact, back in, I think it was 2002, I attended an event in Chicago with the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, and he broke down what his job was. And so I'll give it to you in a nutshell, because it fits our job description. First, as ambassadors, and this is really important, you are the legal and official representative of Jesus Christ. I can't think of any other calling higher than that. You are literally the official and legal representative. And then an ambassador ensures that you align your own interests with the interests of your government, in this case, the King of Kings. And you now represent his interests and not your own. And then an ambassador takes the time to study and understand his own government's power, position, message, which is what we do as we engage in studying God's word. And then finally, an ambassador takes the time, and this is something the U.S. ambassador emphasized, that while you're not part of the culture, you're in it, but you're not of it. Nevertheless, you take the time to study and understand their worldview, their perspective, their history, their context, so that you can make the case in a clear and understandable manner. And I think that's our job. That's our job as ambassadors for Christ. That is what we are supposed to do, so that you can do two things: communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ effectively. And then secondly, and this is another side to the whole diplomatic community, when you see challenges arise to the king's message, you can then alert the rest of the diplomatic community. This is where the challenges will be coming. Right. Keep your eyes open so that you can properly position yourself. So, I mean, that's in essence what our job is supposed to be, regardless of if we go to the Parliament of the World Religions, or you go to a pagan event, or you go to a United Nations event, or you walk into Walmart. Same thing.
Same thing, right. So how does this work itself out? Now, Ron has heard me tell a story. I was in construction for 40 years, and Carl, you know that. And I had a lot of clients I had worked with and for who would recommend me to others. And I had, for example, I had an architect, just an atheist. He was an atheist architect. And we always would engage in religious discussion. Usually he would come with a new argument as to why he should reject Christianity. And that was always fun. And we had a great time doing that. But he would start off his phone calls with it for a new client to call me and say, "Are you still a Bible banger?" Of course, Price is still in. Okay, good. I told him he could trust you. So he had developed a relationship such that he could call me a Bible banger and it was okay. We're just friends. Mm-hmm. He trusted me regardless of whether he agreed with me or not, and that worked fine for us. So it's how you treat people that's really important here, and ask questions. It is so critical that this happens, and so few Christians seem to understand that.
I think it's been lost, and part of the reason it's been lost is because we have been reactionary instead of responsive. And so social media too has definitely helped in that capacity. We don't actually respond with a thought out, well-reasoned position. We react. We sit and just throw our emotions on the table. And I see that too also on the other side. So while somebody maybe, let's say within the parliament itself, they will lead a workshop or give a keynote position or an address, and there is definitely a hostility towards Christianity, and then you end up sitting down and having lunch with the guy, and all of a sudden it's one-on-one. It's a little different story all of a sudden. Now all of a sudden we treat each other with more respect because we're off that platform.
Now Beber, David Van Beber, asked this question, and I want to start this off because you can, and then you can jump into it. This is something that's just, to me, was just too fun. It happened in Toronto, and Carl and I were down outside. It was drizzling. The First Nation people were doing their opening exercises for the Parliament. First time, frankly, I ever heard Old MacDonald had a farm in an Indian dialect. That was kind of special. And then we went upstairs to find what's your friend's name? Not Audrey, but her husband.
Brian.
Ryan was there. Brian was there, and James Lopez, our associate, and they were talking with a woman from California, as it turns out, who was a New Ager, believed that God was her light inside, her guiding light. And so when we got up there, I was listening. I started asking a few questions about what she believed, and by and by, and I was in my outfit, my fringe jacket, all the Indian beading, and all that kind of stuff, which seems non-threatening to people. They sort of like that, so it's good. And then suddenly she turned to me and asked the big question that scares most people when they ask it is, what do you believe? And I said, you need to prepare yourself. I am self-conservative. I can't turn off when I'm driving. I'm a Bible-believing evangelical. And she stopped. And she looked at Brian and said, and you? And he goes, yeah, kind of the same thing. And looked at James and said, you? Well, yeah, kind of the same thing. And I think you were there at that point. And then she said, I don't believe this. I'm with 4 evangelical men, conservatives, and I'm not afraid. I said, why would you be afraid? She said, well, I've heard on the news. And I said, that's your first problem. You can't believe everything you hear on the news. And we engaged in what turned out to be about another hour discussion, in addition to which Brian and Audrey, after that, for several months, if I recall, had email exchanges and phone calls, and the gospel was very clearly laid out. I don't know if she ever became a believer, but our task was fulfilled in giving her the gospel clearly, understandably, in a kind way, and she had a different understanding than of who we are.
Yep. Those kinds of conversations happen. And I mean, that's the reason we go. That's certainly a big part of the reason we go. I'm going, I mean, as a researcher, obviously, but you're looking for those conversations and you desire to have those conversations. And in a place like the Parliament, it is open to have those conversations if you are respectful and treat them as brothers and sisters in Adam. And I think that's a big part of it. And there's a lesson to be learned in doing that. In fact, it's a good thing to do, is to go out of your comfort zone and have those kinds of conversations.
Right. And it also requires, which is something that we have difficulty doing because we're trying to make sure we get to the gospel, is to listen to what they're telling you.
Yep. That's a big one. That is a big one. That's usually our first, because we've done a fair amount of this at Burning Man, especially in 17, 18, and 19, where we put our little crew together, and we had all kinds of different opportunities, and so much of it just really boiled down to, let's listen to what that person has to say, and get to know them as a person. In fact, in 2018 especially, we actually had people who moved in alongside of us to continue having the conversation all week long. People that were complete strangers to us.
Right.
So, you're planting a seed. That's what you're doing. And is there fruit to be seen? I don't know. And in some respects, you walk away from it all going, I just hope and pray that there is fruit. Nevertheless, God's word doesn't go void. So, and I know Bill Hansberger's had an opportunity to continue conversations. Don, you've continued conversations. I've continued conversations. In fact, this weekend, I began the process of starting another conversation of sorts with a couple of burners who happen to be in my province, and I'm bringing some gear to Burning Man for them because they couldn't take everything in with their luggage. So hey, you're looking for those opportunities. First of all, to treat them as a human, and then to express the love of Christ to them.
Right. I think one of the frustrations for some pastors and churches at this sort of discussion is Some of them were looking for the dramatic. We shared the gospel with someone and they came to the faith immediately. And there are occasions where that happens, but mostly I find that what Paul wrote is true. Some plant, some water, God gives the increase. You may not see the increase happen. You may not see the seed spring into life. You may not be part of the whole watering process. You
Right.
may just be a seed planter, or you may be the waterer. So you may not see it this side of heaven. But I can tell you that I have, even now, from time to time, an email or a phone call from someone I met at the Parliament or the New Age Fair or whatever that will go, I've been thinking about what you said, and I'm confused about this. Can you explain this better? And so it engages in this discussion, and they trust me. That's important. You build trust that
Yeah.
they know that they can ask us hard questions that we may disagree with, but we will respect their view anyway.
And sometimes you don't know where the conversations end up going or how it ever plays out. So 2017, my friend Bob Worley and I decided to go to the burn. We didn't know each other before. I mean, we talked on the phone, but we never sat down and really worked through stuff together, never hashed it out in person, face to face. That was the first time. And so all that week, every morning, we would sit down and we'd end up having coffee and share each other's testimonies, speak about certain things we've learned from Scripture. We were talking Christianese the whole time, whenever we would sit down in the morning. Well, we had a tent that was pitched by a young gentleman. His name was Paul from France. And he had put his tent right up against my tent because we have 50-mile-an-hour winds in the afternoon, and he wants to make sure his tent is stable. So he asked if he could pitch his tent.
You said 50-mile-an-hour winds?
Yes, that's right. So we have whiteout dust storm conditions.
50, okay.
Yep. And so we have whiteout conditions, and he wanted to make sure that his tent was stable and was underneath the protection of my larger tent. Cool. Put it up against. I mean, literally right up against. Well, I think it was on Thursday, Paul comes to me and he crawls out of his tent after Bob and I had one of our talks, and he comes up to me and says, "I hope it's okay, but I've been eavesdropping on all of your conversations." Yes, of course it's okay. Cool.
Right. So David Van Bever asked another question. As I think about your approaching the Parliament and being there, what is spiritual opposition that you personally face and feel, and how do you prepare for this? Frankly, the spiritual opposition I get, I don't know about you, mostly comes from certain Christian groups themselves.
Yep.
That are outside the Parliament, who view that what we do is selling out to paganism by even entering the establishment. And
Yep.
The way I prepare for that is I remind myself God has called me to do exactly this. I'm a missionary to cults and non-Christian religions. If I'm going to be a missionary, I have to go into their lives, where they live, how they believe, how they eat. I mean, we go, you talked about yesterday about losing weight while I'm there and how I can linger at the Langor. What's the Langor, by the way?
The Langer is a Sikh vegetarian meal that they serve to all the participants for free.
For free, right.
Yep.
And it's not bad fare.
No.
And I'm not a vegetarian, but I thought it was interesting. Plus, you can engage in, guess what? Really interesting conversation. So, David, the spiritual opposition that I mostly faced comes more from segments of Christianity. Not all. Many just don't really understand what we're doing. Like my church, they're like, "We're so glad you do this, but we would be terrified of doing it." And it can feel that way, but I've been doing this like you. I've been doing this a really long time, so that's not a fearful thing anymore.
Yeah, I'd have to echo your answer. My pushback comes from again segments of the Christian community, quite often pastors. I've had quite a bit of pastoral pushback from whenever I've gone and spoke at different events, all of a sudden there's unless I communicate it well, and even if I do communicate it well, sometimes there's a misunderstanding, and then you have to try to sit down and set some things straight. And inevitably, when I go to certain events, and most of them I don't even, historically, I haven't even announced, but in the age of social media, I've announced more than I probably have in the past. But certain events, certain pagan events, not the Parliament so much, but other pagan events, I've often had some pushback. But again, from the Christian community itself. I have had one encounter, and that was just about 6 weeks ago, I guess now, when I went to a regional burn event in Alberta, where I had an individual who I believe was possessed. Just the nature of the whole exchange, and that was pretty wild. And you know, something that's going to happen. But at the same token, and I had this same kind of conversation literally 2 days ago. I was speaking at a church camp, and I had questions about how do you spiritually prepare, and I asked the question back: how do you spiritually prepare walking into McDonald's? Right. Same people are there. Yeah. Same worldview is there. It's just one is intense and open. The other one is just simply there, and you're interacting with it without ever recognizing it.
And the advantage of doing it the way we do it is we find out what people actually believe. So we might know sort of the official teachings of a group, but an individual may vary from that. We may think we know the official teachings of, say, I don't know, I'm going to pick on Satanism, for example, for a moment, or Druidism, because of something we read written by a Christian author, who, as you do research into their belief systems and their books they write and the practices that you do, that whatever the Christian wrote, like, I don't know, Mike Warnke, Satan seller, is complete fraud. And so we believe false things. Now we're accusing them of false things as a result of reading material that represents falsely what they believe. They are clearly not Christian. They clearly are under the control of the evil one, I would suggest, by virtue of their religious choices. But do they really know that that's what's going on? I would argue they generally do.
Right.
So finding out firsthand what they believe puts us in a better position to talk with them and ask questions about the beliefs in order to get to the gospel. We find Paul did that, didn't he?
Yep.
Acts 17.
Yeah, and for myself as a researcher, I find that is extremely important, actually going and listening and hearing firsthand, getting their own literature, finding out from their perspective where they're at. If I don't, then I'm going to end up doing the same thing that most of us do in terms of where we get our research from. We sit down and Google it. And that's not research. That may be information retrieval, but that is very little of that is actual research. Research is taking that time to literally listen.
Right.
Without interruption, and then when interruption does come, when you can bring your voice into it, you're asking questions that pry open the conversation even further.
And the really fun part of listening is they will always give you something important to ask back.
Yes.
And you know, it's like you can hear a lot just by listening. It's kind of a variation on Yogi Berra. You can
that could be an
observe a
ancient
lot.
proverb.
Yeah, you can. Yogi Berra said you can observe a lot just by watching.
Yeah.
And
Ron, I'm going to listen and watch while you walk us out of here.
Okay. Well, would you like me to do the slow walk or the quick walk? Let's find out. Let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident, I keep saying regular. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. That's his name. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witness coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys. Oh, dehumanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Joe Pulling. Technical assistance comes from Wiki Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Ivana Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Love it. Love it.
Thank you. So, So happy to have you here. Now you know you have been had, Carl.
And we may not have a webcast next week. If I get down there and I can figure out a way to pull it off, Ron, I'll let you know on Monday that we can do one. Otherwise, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
All right. Blessings to everybody.